This story begins on a heated soccer field. A World Cup final match between the United States and Brazil is underway. All eyes are on the tense final moments. In the end, the United States becomes a champion thanks to a penalty kick from their team captain, Slim. His shot is perfect. Brazil is defeated. The entire team immediately erupts in celebration. On the way home, they board a plane. The head coach takes a moment to congratulate his players. After that, he sits next to his wife. Coincidentally, it is his wife's birthday that day. This special occasion is why their two daughters, Eva and Elena, are flying with them. The two girls happily chat about their parents with pride. But in the middle of all the happiness, Slim looks worried instead. He seems restless, as if he has a bad feeling about the flight. Andreas notices and tries to calm him down, telling him to get some sleep. But Slim can't close his eyes, not only because his mind is a mess, but also because he really needs to use the bathroom. So Slim heads to the restroom.
Take a deep breath. Wow, you're gonna have to be more specific.
As he's about to return to his seat, the plane is suddenly hit by a violent jolt. No one knows exactly what happened. Seeing Slim become even more panicked, the assistant coach, Connie, tells him to sit nearby and gives him a sleeping pill. After taking the pill, Slim returns to his seat and finally falls fast asleep. But the calm doesn't last long. The plane's lights suddenly start flashing as a warning. The aircraft begins shaking violently. One of its wings catches fire. Then the plane loses control and crashes into the waters of Malaysia, right near an uninhabited island. Still unconscious, Slim remains strapped to his seat. Fortunately, Andreas manages to save him and bring him to the nearest shore. The crash kills the head coach, his wife, several players, and the entire flight crew. Only about 15 people survive. They end up stranded on a deserted island in terrible condition. Some of them are still lying weakly on the sand. Now awake, Slim can only sit there in silence. He never imagined he would end up stranded on such a deserted island.
It's the trainer. Slim.
Slim then walks over to Elena, who is standing on top of a hill looking down below. From a distance, Elena spots a body that she believes is her father's. Slim goes down to check. Sure enough, it is Elena's father. But Slim can't bring himself to tell her the truth. So he lies and says there's nothing down there. Meanwhile, the other survivors begin to wake up. They start checking their suitcases and belongings. Slim finds a cell phone in his bag. For a moment, he's happy, thinking he can contact the rescue team. Meanwhile, Andreas, who has just finished swimming, manages to recover some medical supplies from the plane wreckage. He gives them to Connie, hoping they will be useful. Andreas then walks over to Slim, who is happily holding his phone. But Slim's hope is immediately crushed when Andreas tells him it's almost impossible to contact anyone because there isn't a single signal tower anywhere around the island. Andreas then asks Slim, as the team captain, to start thinking and come up with a plan for everyone's survival. But Slim pushes himself too hard. Suddenly, his nose starts bleeding and he collapses. Andreas panics and immediately calls Connie to treat him.
Connie!
On the second day, Andreas takes over the role of rationing the food. At one point, his younger brother, Georgie, walks over and tries to take an extra small bag of food. Andreas immediately stops him, not because he's heartless, but because he doesn't want to play favorites in a situation like this. Everyone is starving. Meanwhile, Ken, Arnie, and Marquise dive to the bottom of the sea to recover the remaining food from the plane wreckage. But Arnie makes a mistake. He lets go of the food they worked so hard to collect, saying there was a shark that threatened their lives. This makes Ken furious, and he immediately punches Arnie. Fortunately, Replic manages to hold Arnie back before the situation gets even worse. Andreas quickly steps in to break up the fight. After hearing both Ken's and Arnie's explanations, Andreas makes it clear that he doesn't want to see any more fighting. In his opinion, there's still one team and need to stick together, help each other, and stop thinking only about themselves.
Take it easy, man.
Now the currents just carried them out to sea.
This is still a team!
By the fourth day, Slim's condition starts to improve. He regains consciousness and looks much better. Elena and Georgie come over to see him. Happy to be awake, Slim immediately reaches for some drinking water, but Georgie quickly stops him. The rations can't be redistributed yet. That's the rule Andreas made while Slim was sick. Not long after, Andreas comes over and hugs Slim. Then he asks to speak with him in private. Andreas explains that their food supply is running low, especially their drinking water. The problem is that the island has no source of fresh water at all. Andreas also says that Sevi and Stefan, who are still bedridden, need a lot of water to clean the infected wounds on their legs. As a result, everyone else is becoming even thirstier. Andreas then makes a harsh suggestion. He thinks they should take away Sevi's and Stefan's rations and let them die to save everyone else. But Slim eventually sees for himself that treating Sevi's wound really does use up a lot of water. Unable to bear it, Slim decides to give up his own water ration to help clean Sevi's wound.
Good night.
I'm sorry, Sev. We agreed no.
After that, Slim tries to find a signal, but unfortunately his phone battery is almost dead. That night, they gather again. Things heat up as they argue over their rapidly shrinking food supply. Some of them suggest cutting Sevi's and Stefan's rations. Connie, the wisest and oldest among them, immediately gets furious. To him, that suggestion is no different from letting Sevi and Stefan die. Slim then asks everyone to come to an agreement. Andreas is the first to say he agrees that Sevi's and Stefan's rations should be reduced. In the end, most of them agree because they can't think of any other reasonable way to survive.
Why not add Slim to the list?
It's the only way to do it, right?
Connie, who is in charge of taking care of Stefan, can only sit there sadly as he watches Stefan suffer. There's not much he can do except try to comfort him.
Okay. Gotta go home real soon.
The next morning, Andreas wakes Slim up. He tells him that Stefan has died. With a heavy heart, Andreas buries Stefan's body. Later that afternoon, Georgie is walking to the jungle when he accidentally spots another island in the distance. It's not very far away. Georgie immediately tells Andreas. Andreas and Slim go to check for themselves. After confirming it, Andreas asks for permission to take Elena, Arnie, and Marquise to the island. Maybe they'll find food and water there. Slim agrees, and the four of them set off.
What if there were sharks?
After Andreas and his group leave, Slim walks over to Connie, who is sitting quietly near the cliff. Connie admits that he's worried. Finding food and water is incredibly difficult, especially with so many poisonous plants on the island. Slim feels the same way, but all he can do is accept the situation. He then says he's going to get some rest and asks Connie to wake him up later. But before Slim gets very far, he hears the sound of someone jumping. Connie has taken his own life out of despair. Shocked, Slim immediately rushes over and retrieves Connie's body. Elsewhere, Doug and Georgie are gathering firewood. Suddenly, Doug gets caught in barbed wire. Georgie tries to help and manages to free him, but then tragedy strikes Georgie instead. Without realizing it, he steps on a landmine and is blown into the air. His leg is shattered. Andreas and the others, who have just returned, are startled by the explosion. They immediately run toward the sound. Andreas finds his younger brother, Georgie, badly injured and, through tears, calls out for Connie. Slim hasn't had the chance to tell him that Connie is already dead. That night, the mood on the island is extremely grim. Everyone is still overwhelmed with grief. Connie is dead, and Georgie's condition is getting worse. Andreas keeps holding his younger brother as he cries nonstop. Deep down, Andreas begins to lose all hope. He feels like he's lost his faith and belief. In his troubled mind, he believes it's almost impossible to save Georgie in a situation like this. To him, letting Georgie stay alive would only prolong his suffering. Without thinking, consumed by despair, Andreas makes a fatal decision. He kills Georgie. Eva accidentally witnesses the cruel act. All she can do is stand there in silence as she watches the horrifying scene. On the 8th day after they become stranded, Eva and Felix begin thinking of a way to survive. They suggest an idea to Slim: cut up one of the remaining life rafts and use it to collect dew. But Patton and McKenna immediately reject the plan. Patton explains that their food and water supplies are already running dangerously low. The life raft is their only hope if they ever get a chance to leave the island and find help. According to Patton, the life raft will be essential if someone manages to make it back to civilization and contact a rescue team. Even so, Slim doesn't completely accept Patton's reasoning. Instead, he agrees with Eva's and Felix's idea. Meanwhile, Andreas sinks even deeper into despair. He often isolates himself, cries, and regrets taking his younger brother's life. The guilt and emotional burden leave him looking completely empty. At almost the same time, before Eve and Felix can cut up the life raft, Patton and McKenna take it first. They use it to escape from the island. Arnie is the first to notice what they're doing and immediately alerts everyone else. The whole group tries to chase Patton and McKenna, but they completely fail. Patton and McKenna act very aggressively. They don't hesitate to attack anyone who gets in their way, and they eventually manage to escape.
It's my fault. Them acting weird.
On the 9th day, Ken secretly heads into the jungle. After making sure no one is watching, he pulls out some food that he's been hiding all along. Arnie, who has suspected Ken from the beginning, finally discovers what he's been doing. Arnie takes the food and tells Doug and Marquise to capture Ken. They manage to catch him, and Arnie, Doug, and Marquise immediately start beating him. Fortunately, Slim and Felix arrive just in time. They stop the beating before Ken suffers even more serious injuries. But things heat up again when Andreas shows up. He forces Ken to spit out the food he has already eaten. Felix tries to stop Andreas, but he fails. Andreas manages to grab Ken and kills him in an extremely brutal way. Seeing such cruelty, Slim can't just stand by. He tries to stop Andreas, and the two get into a fierce fight that nearly turns deadly. Just when Slim is about to lose, Felix rushes in to help him. Unfortunately, in the middle of the chaos, the knife Andreas is holding accidentally slashes Felix's neck. The wound kills Felix instantly on the beach. Felix's death leaves Eva, Slim, and Elena heartbroken. The atmosphere becomes even more terrifying. Andreas seems to be losing control of himself more and more. That night, Andreas decides to move to the island across from them. Strangely, Arnie, Marquise, Doug, and Elena choose to go with him. They all know just how dangerous Andreas has become. The next morning, Ken, who turns out to still be alive, comes out of hiding. He asks Slim, who is still surviving on the island. Slim tells him that only Eva, Sevi, and Ken are left there. After that, Ken and Eva work together to set up seashells to collect dew. While they're working, Ken finally admits his regret to Eva. He confesses that when the plane crashed, he saw Eva's father floating right in front of him, but he didn't save him. Hearing the confession, Eva doesn't get angry. Instead, she accepts it as part of the fate she has to live with.
It was too dark to see exactly who he was.
We're all here for a reason.
Meanwhile, Andreas and his group manage to make a fishing trap, but all their effort is wasted because they don't catch a single fish. In contrast, Slim uses nothing but his bare hands and still manages to catch fish to survive.
You got one of those for me.
The next day, Ken and Eva check their homemade dew collectors again. This time, they're happy to find that the containers have collected water. That small success gives them new hope. The following day, Slim realizes they've run out of water. He immediately concludes that Andreas' group stole it because they're desperately short on drinking water. Slim goes to Andreas and asks him to join forces again so they can survive together. But Andreas refuses, and Slim decides not to force him.
Elena?
After returning, Slim tells Eva and Ken that Andreas and his group don't want to reunite. Ken feels guilty because he realizes the division started because of his mistake. Feeling responsible, he decides to try convincing Andreas once more to come back together. Meanwhile, Slim manages to rescue Elena and takes her to a hiding place that's safe from Andreas' group. Once things calm down a little, Slim tries to sneak up behind Arnie. His plan is to quietly take Arnie down. But unfortunately, Arnie is more alert than he expected. Arnie immediately notices Slim's presence, forcing Slim to run for his life. While escaping, Slim trips and ends up stopping near a tree. He's completely cornered. Just as Arnie is about to kill Slim, Marquise suddenly shows up and saves him. Marquise has learned the truth, that Arnie is the one who has been trying to harm Elena from the very beginning. As Marquise is about to confront Arnie and stop his madness, Arnie betrays him instead. He attacks Marquise from behind. In the end, Marquise is killed by the very person he should have been able to trust. After surviving the attack, Slim quickly returns to his group. He leads them to a safer location. At their new hiding place, Slim explains to Ken that they have no other choice if they want to stay alive. The only way is to fight Andreas and the people who are still loyal to him, including Arnie. Realizing how dangerous the situation has become, Ken agrees with the plan. He then carries out a strategy to lure the opposing group by creating an explosion as a distraction. The explosion successfully draws Andreas and Arnie's attention. Furious and suspicious, they head toward the source of the blast. When Arnie becomes separated from the rest of his group, Slim comes out of hiding and attacks Andreas. Slim manages to knock Andreas down and choke him until he's completely helpless. Even though he has a chance to kill him, Slim holds back. He can't bring himself to go that far because he still holds on to his faith in humanity. After surviving, Andreas finally regrets everything he has done. He chooses to help rescue Elena and brings her back to reunite with Eva and Sevi. Now the only conflict left is between Andreas and Arnie. Ken lures Arnie toward the edge of a cliff. Just as Arnie is about to attack Ken, Slim, who has been waiting behind him, strikes. Together, Ken and Slim shove Arnie off the cliff. The greatest threat that had haunted them all this time finally comes to an end. Meanwhile, Andreas brings Eva, Sevi, and Elena to the beach to wait for a possible rescue. But suddenly, Andreas shows up again and tries to force Elena to go with him. Elena firmly refuses, while Sevi steps in to protect her. The situation quickly escalates until Slim arrives and gets into a fierce fight with Andreas. The fight goes on for quite a while before Slim finally manages to overpower him. Once again, Slim chooses not to kill Andreas. He believes that life and death are not for humans to decide, but are in God's hands. As Slim walks away, leaving Andreas helpless, Andreas suddenly gets back up and attacks him again. The two begin struggling with each other once more. In the middle of the fight, a rescue helicopter suddenly appears over the island. Realizing the rescue team has arrived, Andreas decides to run away. He's afraid of being held accountable for all the crimes he has committed. In the end, Slim, Eva, Sevi, Elena, and Ken are rescued by the rescue team. It turns out their location was discovered thanks to Patton and McKenna, who had previously escaped from the island. While aboard the helicopter, the rescue captain asks if anyone else is still left on the island. With a calm expression, Slim replies that no one is left. In reality, Andreas is still alive and chooses to remain on the island, distancing himself from the world and from the consequences of his own actions. And that's the end of the movie.